Webinar on Peace Education in Action. My name is Kim Weichel, and I will be your host for today's discussion. I'm a Rotary Peace Fellow who completed the certificate program at Chulalongkorn in 2012 and a committed peace builder, educator, and mentor living in the Washington, D.C. area. Today's webinar is the fourth in a series organized by Peace Fellows for Rotarians and others during this pandemic to create opportunities to generate new ideas, new partnerships, and above all, creative action steps that we can take back to our clubs and communities to expand peace education. We are grateful to have so many of you on the call joining us from many cities and countries around the world. We're recording today's session for those who could not attend, and the administrator will keep participants muted during the general session. Today we'll explore such questions as how do we more effectively educate about peace and what does it look like in action? All important questions since we believe that peace is a universal human value which has been core to Rotary International. Since 1999, Rotary has funded more than 1,500 peace fellowships, and promoting peace has become one of Rotary's 6 areas of focus. Reardon, a 20th century leader in peace and human rights education at Columbia University, famously said, "To reach peace, we need to teach peace." Former Undersecretary General and High Representative of the UN, Ambassador Chowdhury, has said that the most significant way of promoting a culture of peace is through peace education, something that needs to be accepted in all parts of the world. In 1999, the following definition was introduced at the Hague Appeal for Peace Conference. Peace education is teaching for and about human rights, gender equality, disarmament, social and economic justice, nonviolence, sustainable development, and international law. Later, the need for education about traditional peace practices was added to the definition. So what does peace education in action look like? Who is receiving it and in what practical ways? Today, our 4 speakers will share their distinct perspectives and case examples of applied peace education in global policy and coalition building, to shift culture and reinforce the sustainable goals, to continue a legacy of nonviolent movements, and to equip a new generation of peace builders. What the speakers have in common is their emphasis on the need to educate young people while simultaneously equipping adults as educated allies and supporters in the prevention of conflict and promotion of peace. They will make the case that peace education is a necessary foundation for long-lasting peace and is a holistic approach to positive change. Speakers will highlight congressional passage of the Global Fragility Act, signed into law in December 2019, with the goal of creating the first comprehensive U.S. government strategy to tackle and prevent global conflict. We'll learn about recent unrest and change in Bolivia, a country that has an established philosophy of creating a culture of peace. We'll gain insight into how the Birmingham Civil Rights Institute is preserving and building on a legacy of nonviolent peace education. And we'll hear about examples of education, training, and mentoring linked to the Global Peace Index and Positive Peace Index from the Institute for Economics and Peace. Recognizing that Rotary International is connected to thousands of young people via Interact, Rotary Youth Exchange, Rotaract, and others, the speakers will emphasize and provide concrete examples of peace education with young people in particular. After our presenters speak, they will answer questions. So please post your questions while they're speaking in the chat box. After questions, we'll go into the breakout discussions and come back together to hear ideas and actions that we've generated. So let's first hear from Megan Schleicher, who is Senior Associate for Policy and Communications at the Alliance for Peacebuilding, working on the Youth Peace and Security Act, conflict sensitivity, and locally led peacebuilding. Welcome, Megan.
Hi, thank you so much, Kim, for that great introduction. And honestly, it's an honor to be speaking to you all today at this webinar, and I'm excited about the speakers that come after me as well. As Kim said, my name is Megan Schleicher, and I'm the Senior Associate for Policy and Communications at the Alliance for Peacebuilding. For those who may not know, the Alliance for Peacebuilding, which is actually a really big partner to Rotary, is the leading global network that works to end conflict and build sustainable peace worldwide. So we're a membership organization made up of over 120 members working in 153 countries around the world. And we include some of the world's largest development organizations, innovative academic institutions, as well as influential humanitarian and faith-based groups. We bring together coalitions in key areas of strategy, design, monitoring, and evaluation, and policy to elevate the field and tackle issues that are too large for any one organization to address alone. So I'm excited to talk to all of you today about the integration of peace education into our advocacy work and the legislative agenda. We are working with policymakers, such as our colleagues on the Hill and those in other parts of government like USAID and Department of State, to include important language on peace in the United States policy and to set priorities for US legislation. And ultimately, really, to make conflict prevention and peace building the center of US foreign policy. Important examples include the recently passed Global Fragility Act, which was mentioned, and the upcoming opportunity, the Youth, Peace, and Security Act, which I'll get into a little bit more in depth in about a minute. So most of our advocacy and peace education work is done through traditional ways. And despite the COVID-19 pandemic, we are still constantly talking with the Hill, though on the phone now, and sometimes with video chat, which I have learned the hard way, wearing a fuzzy purple sweater one day on Zoom. Always still look good. Refining talking points and developing questions for the record for relevant hearings is kind of like the core traditional stuff that we still do. So amidst the US COVID-19 strategy, peace building has really been viewed as an afterthought, if at all. So over the last couple of weeks, my colleagues and I from Alliance for Peacebuilding, as well as a number of other organizations, have been on the phone with now over 30 offices sitting on the Senate and House Appropriations Committee to ensure there's funding for foreign assistance in the new upcoming CARES 2.0/HEROES Act. We've also sent numerous letters to the House and Senate members and engaged with our community to create strong joint statements, as well as release articles and opinion pieces to advocate for peace building and the inclusion of funding for these really important programs. We're trying to argue that COVID-19 is not just a health crisis. As my Vice President Liz Hume put it recently, COVID-19 is stabilization in reverse. Activities like peace building, conflict prevention, and governance cannot be second ordered during this pandemic, as it will only further exacerbate the conflict dynamics, especially in fragile contexts. So this is what we're really trying to push forward. We're trying to educate members of Congress about this perspective that's not always, quickly seen. So, however, though, as you might have already seen or know, the draft that was released by the House last week for the new CARES Act does not include any funding for foreign assistance, which was very disappointing for us to see. So in response to that, we're working really hard still with our champions on the Hill and other advocacy organizations to ensure that this bill does end up with funding for that necessary foreign assistance. If I can move on to the next slide. To be a little bit more, so as Kim was mentioning, to be a little bit more specific about the Global Fragility Act and the YPS that was mentioned earlier. So the Global Fragility Act was passed last year in December 2019 with extensive bipartisan support. AFP and our member Mercy Corps together co-lead a coalition of over 60 organizations, ranging from peace building organizations, development organizations, academia, faith-based groups, and others. We've been working on the GFA since 2016. At this time, AFP and Mercy Corps came up with the idea of it, since the USG had no comprehensive policy on peace building and conflict prevention. So the idea was conceived, and the coalition, as it started growing, found bipartisan sponsorship with Representatives Engel and McCall, who you may know co-lead the House Foreign Affairs Committee. So as the coalition found additional sponsors, the language kept changing and compromises were made, but the coalition had certain points that would not be compromised on, which are really important, we think, to peace. And this is what we really instilled in the policy that was written, was points around local education, evidence-based programming, and the inclusion of prevention countries in the Global Fragility Act. In the final passage of the Global Fragility Act, there were a few holdups with members of Congress in which we had to stage massive grassroots campaigns and movements and contact influential champions to end up getting it through. We had to touch base with constituents in certain members' districts to provide further education on why the constituency cared about this as well, which ended up really being influential in helping to get it passed. So now that it is passed, we're moving on to assist in important aspects of the GFA, one of which is a requirement that the US government hold consultations with local civil society around the world to integrate local perspectives into the strategy design. The strategy design, I'll quickly note, is due to Congress in September this year. So we're working hard to make sure that everything and these local perspectives are included in it. as well as eventual programming and implementation of the GFA. So AFP, along with our member partner, Peacedirect, are holding an open call virtual consultation on a platform called Platform for Dialogue with Peacebuilders around the world in just a few weeks to start this consultation process and learn ways to remove barriers to participation and ensure the consultations with the US government are ongoing and useful. Since this is a requirement, we want to ensure that this keeps happening and we keep bringing these local voices in. I'll actually be able to share the call for participants with all of you. If there's anyone who's interested in participating or know of local organizations, that would be great for this. Also on the advocacy side, on those calls with appropriators I mentioned, we're also educating and urging Congress on the importance of allocating funding to the GFA and what that would look like, especially how the principles within the GFA are needed now more than ever to address this global pandemic. And finally on the GFA, I'll quickly note that AFP, along with One Earth Future, developed a report which includes input from experts in civil society, government, academia, that includes recommendations for the implementation of the GFA. It's actually currently a working paper, and we're still accepting comments and suggestions that can be included in further addendum. So building on the success of the GFA, especially in terms of bipartisan support and coalition building, AFP now co-leads a coalition of currently over 40 organizations for the Youth, Peace, and Security Act alongside Search for Common Ground. The legislation was recently introduced in March, and we are now working to maintain bipartisan support and educate Congress on the importance of the inclusion of youth in US strategies and programming. Like with the GFA, we noticed that the US government lacked a comprehensive strategy on the engagement of youth, so this seeks to address that. Youth around the world are often seen as victims or perpetrators of conflict rather than the agents of change we know they are. So they're working on the front lines of COVID-19 response in their communities to keep people safe and communities together. These are the stories we are bringing to policymakers to advocate for YPS. We are working with youth in the US and around the world on grassroots and advocacy campaigns. And we have partnered with renowned institutions to work with students on the release of op-eds and to get youth involved in advocacy and campaigning. I also want to quickly note that I know Rotary is doing absolutely phenomenal work with youth, and this is absolutely essential to get youth further involved on the advocacy front and to work on issues that matter most to them. I will quickly end with the note that I will be passing along more information on both of these acts. I tried hard not to get too much into detail on them, but if I can definitely share more information. There's many ways to still get involved if any organizations or members are interested in being part of the coalition for YPS or just kind of learning more and helping with advocacy and campaigning. We're always doing education to Congress through briefings, through statements, through articles and op-eds. So I'll quickly end on that. And if there's, like I said, if there are any more questions, I'm happy to answer in the Q&A or just personally on my own. And I just want to say thank you all again for having me here. It's been wonderful to talk to you all on these important pieces of legislation and advocacy work.
Thank you, Megan. You packed a lot of information into a really short time. I'm a huge fan of the Alliance for Peacebuilding and have been involved with it for years. So thrilled to have you. So we're now going to hear from Ximena Murillo, who is a Rotary Peace Fellow and CEO and President of United for Change Center, a global development organization that promotes social justice and sustainable peace in fragile communities around the world. So welcome, Ximena.
Thank you so much, Kim, for the introduction. And well, again, I'm a Rotary Peace Fellow from Chulalongkorn, class 24. I'm based in Houston, Texas. So anyways, I'm gonna take you before COVID to 2019. As you know, there was a tsunami of protests and movements around the world. Millions of people went to the streets in 17 countries, in many of the continents. And some of the causes, of course, were economic dissatisfaction, inequality, corruption, and bad governance. So looking into these movements, before I go to the topic of Bolivia particularly, we showed, the movement showed something very different. There was no need for armed struggle in some cases, no guns, but rather different type of techniques in terms of protesting. There was a changing nature of power and a shifting role of activism. It means that the power was shown by young people. We have to remember that 41% of the global population is under 24. And at that time, they were very, very upset of their leaderships and what was going on in their countries. So let me take you now to Latin America, to one of the most beautiful countries in South America, Bolivia. As you know, is one of the most challenged countries as well, where 60%, more than 60% of the population is indigenous, is one of the poorest countries in South America, but is one of the most pacifist countries also, with a very embedded sense of peace. And that is shown also in the Constitution. There is a part of the Constitution that talks about living well, that is not similar of what we understand by well-being, but it's related to protect the health of the people, the environment, and that relationship of peace and harmony between people and Mother Earth, especially indigenous people. So after October 2019, going back to these movements that we were talking about, a lot of people, and the majority young people, protested on the streets, and the results were by the majority successful. The ex-president resigned and then left the country. But there was something very unique in this success of this movement, you know, what the majority was looking for. And that was that it was a very large and diverse participation of people, people that were not active before. They just went to the streets and had their voices heard. There was also a lot of this crack in police and military, that they were supporting the government at that time. And people, citizens were able to go and talk to the police and the military and bring them to their side as humans. They used to bring food to them, tell them that they are part of the people. So that was really interesting, how they were able to crack into that and bring the police and the military on their side. There were also some tactics that they were non-violent, like the strings that people put in the streets, like we call it pitas in Spanish. There were, of course, a lot of movement in social media, different boycotts, strikes, and some of them that really became violent, for the most part, were non-violent. So that shows you the power of young people in Bolivia, and that's where we go to the importance of peace education, and also the importance of learning how to make that sustainable. Because what happens once this movement stops, they are non-static, they come into waves, and what is next, right? So the important thing is that for years, there was the lack of positive peace environment for young people in order for them to be the agents of preventing this type of conflicts. So in terms of seeing the connection and the overlap of the Sustainable Development Goals and the pillars of positive peace, as well as building a culture of peace, as you can see, all the action areas overlap with what we know by positive peace. So then that was one of the reasons why we decided to create a curriculum based on the experience that different organizations, including mine, had in Bolivia for many years. So we can build positive peace and a resilient society in Bolivia. How can we keep young people engaged in the democratic process and so on? So we did a partnership with NewGen Peacebuilders and Mediators Beyond Borders and United for Change. And the exciting part of it is that we've been working with young people in Bolivia. NewGen Peacebuilders, with our peace fellow colleague, Phil Giddens, worked with young people many years ago, developing research and getting to know what is it that they wanted. And then so on, the work that we've been doing also in Bolivia. To keep going, okay, the project itself is going to be delivered virtually with virtual content. Is going to empower 50 young leaders to create that culture of peace with non-violence values, attitudes, behaviors for the everyday peace. What is it after that movement? What is that we're looking for? And we're talking about changing that mindset, those behaviors that are going to create a resilient Bolivia. So in terms of the saying that seeds of peace need to be planted where they can best grow into healthy, sustainable plants. That's what we want to accomplish with young people in Bolivia.
Well, thank you, Ximena. Really, I'm sorry, were you finished?
Yeah, no, if you have questions, yeah, we're gonna answer later.
Thank you. I just wanted to say, I'm sure everyone on the call is familiar with the Sustainable Development Goals, but I'll just say that all member UN nations adopted 17 Sustainable Development Goals to focus on a wide range of global issues to run between the year 2015 and 2030, and every country, including ours, including the US, is supposed to be working on the development of these goals. And it's really a roadmap and a very, very interesting process. So I just wanted to add that to what Ximena shared. So we'll next hear from Charles Woods III, who was outreach coordinator for the Birmingham Civil Rights Institute. Charles travels throughout Alabama, teaching people of all ages and backgrounds about the lessons learned from the civil rights movement. So welcome, Charles.
Greetings, how is everyone?
Good.
Good, I'm getting a little nervous now. I see people from all over the world, so I'm really pleased to be a part of this, and I hope everyone is doing safe. And we can go ahead and start my video if you want. Thank you for that. Once again, my name is Charles Woods, and I'm the Education Programs Manager as well as the Outreach Coordinator from the Birmingham Civil Rights Institute. Birmingham Civil Rights Institute has been in existence since about 1992. And our mission is to enlighten each generation about civil and human rights by exploring our common past and working together to build, working together in the present to build a better future. And so really what I'm here to kind of focus on is how we're able to bring nonviolent peaceful protests across the young people today. And so there's several ways that we do that, but the main two ways that we're able to do that. And if you could show my my slide, I'm not sure if we're we can go to the second slide in my presentation. But the way we're able to bring this across to young people today is that we focus on Birmingham's specific story, which was the Children's Crusade that occurred in the first week of May in 1963. And that is a historical event where the children of Birmingham were really fed up with the living conditions that they had to live in and decided to flood out of their schools on what was called D-Day and go downtown Birmingham to 16th Street Baptist Church and then to protest on the City Hall. Now, what ultimately ended up happening is that a man by the name of Bull Connor was kind of fed up with the protest and decided that he wanted to intercept that with firemen's water hoses and also police dogs. And so if you're not familiar with this story, those images of those police dogs sicking children and being sprayed by water hoses ultimately went around the world and really was a turning point in the civil rights movement here in the United States of America, and specifically in Birmingham. And so what we're able to do is, because you had over 7,000 children that was arrested in that campaign, in that movement, there are many individuals who are still available in the city of Birmingham who participated in that movement. And so with our program called the Legacy Youth Leadership Program, which is a youth program that, hold on, let me go back. With our Legacy Youth Leadership Program, we are able to train young individuals to become docents for our institute and our museum. So what they do is they utilize the assets that Birmingham Civil Rights Institute has to hold on, let me grab my notes real quick. Okay, so Legacy Youth Leadership utilizes Birmingham Civil Rights Institute's missions, collections, programs, and partnerships to engage area high school students and really learn the lessons that the civil rights movement has to teach us. And so, and this is a leadership program that we develop them into young leaders and also become docents of our institute. Now, what they do is they have about 13 weeks, 12 programs where they have an intense history lesson where they learn all kinds of Black history and history of the civil rights movement in America. And then after those 12 weeks, they use that time, they use the time in our institute as volunteer hours to gain their volunteer hours for their high school graduation. Now, the best part about the Legacy Youth Leadership Program is that we are able to expose them to those youth leaders from 1963's Children's Campaign, Children's Crusade. And so these young people are able to sit at the footsteps of these elders and learn the trainings that these elders learn from individuals like Martin Luther King Jr., Ralph Abernathy, Reverend Fred Shuttlesworth, and James Bevel. And that is how we're able to pass on this legacy to these young people. Now, at the Institute, we are a non-partisan, non-advocate group. We don't push these children in any particular direction. But what we do is we equip them with the tools, public speaking skills, leadership skills, to be the leaders for the next generation of peace builders. And so they are able to learn from these individuals and then take that knowledge off to their new colleges, off to their careers, and wherever that they want to take themselves. And then through Legacy Youth Leadership Program, since I've been at the Institute, we've been able to have what's called a reenactment of the Children's Crusade. Now, I always say reenactment minus the dogs and the hoses. What this reenactment is a training program that we have put together to motivate young people to become advocates of whatever issues that they see dear to their own personal hearts. And so at this Children's Crusade reenactment, which we just passed our third annual event, we're able to train them and give them information motivation, and little insight into what the foot soldiers went through to be successful in their civil rights campaign. So we can go on to the next slide, I believe, or the last slide with the reenactment information on it. And so this is just a flyer from our last reenactment. Now the picture to the right, the more modern picture, is where our very first reenactment, where we allowed our foot soldiers to pass the torch to our young people so that they can pick up that torch and run with it and start fighting for issues and things that they find dear to their own hearts. And if we go to the last slide, I think my time is just about up.
So while we're waiting, why don't you just go ahead, Charles?
Okay. And so with
Charles,
the legacy,
go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, so with the Legacy Youth Leadership Program, we have a very good relationship with the U.S. Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C., as well as the Anti-Apartheid Museum in South Africa. And so these young people are not only able to learn from these foot soldiers, get these leadership skills and these public speaking skills, and become lifelong learners and our next leaders in this world, but they also are exposed to information and knowledge that many of us just don't have access to. When we do have our full funding, we are able to travel to DC, where we have an intense program with the U.S. Holocaust Museum. And for 1 year of our 12 years doing this program, we were also able to go to South Africa to participate in a legacy exchange program, if you would, with the people there. So I will leave it at that. If there are any questions, I can cover more information later. But I just want to thank you. I don't want to go over my time.
Thank you, Charles. Such important work. Really appreciated what you shared. So our final speaker is Patricia Shafer, who is a Rotary Peace Fellow and Rotary Positive Peace Activator, as well as the Executive Director of NewGen Peacebuilders, a peace education, training, and mentoring organization working in over 10 countries. So I want to both welcome Patricia and thank her because she's put a tremendous amount of effort in today's webinar. Welcome, Patricia. Hello, Patricia. Maybe, are you muted?
There we go. Hello, everyone. It's really great to be with you, and it's an honor to follow the other three speakers. You know, often things come full circle of their own volition, and I think my presentation really comes full circle to something that Megan Schleicher said when she started her presentation. In fact, she said two things. She thanked Rotary for its leadership and partnership around peace and the promotion of peace. And when you really dig into the history of Rotary, really it was 1914 when Rotary began its trek to influence policy, to actually develop peace education leaders, and to have friendly exchanges around the world. And she said, in the process of peace education, or modern peace education in particular, young people are always seemingly excluded or left without opportunities to engage. So I appreciate that all the speakers have a different take on peace education, but a common thread is an intentionality about how you actually educate people around peace. In my case, I really want to focus on what I call the need for a new mental model of peace builders. And this new mental model moves from the idea that peace is something that gets done by institutions and adults of a certain age and stature, to the idea that there are 3 billion young people on the planet who are under the age of 30, 1.8 billion who are between the ages of 15 and 24, the largest demographic and fastest growing demographic on the planet, that they have new tools, and we're all experiencing some of the new tools that they've been using for some period now because of COVID-19. And as Graham Simpson at Columbia University, who did an important study for the UN about youth as the missing piece of peace building, would say, we constantly underestimate them and therefore don't make the greatest policy decisions when it comes to peace building. So if you can shift with me for a moment to the idea that, you know, a mental model of a peace builder can be a 14-year-old, a 16-year-old. And in fact, we just finished a program with an entire middle school, so 12 to 14-year-olds of 750 students and 31 teachers. So next slide, please, Elizabeth. So if you can shift your mental model for a moment and imagine that I, as a Rotary Peace Fellow, would like to see that there are millions of mini Peace Fellows, meaning young people have had the chance to go through a really disciplined experience around peace education. And I want to share with you that a model that we have been using since 2013 involves young people between the ages of 15 and 24 having the opportunity to go through intense immersion workshops around the fundamentals and tools and frameworks of conflict resolution and peace building, have access to a full catalog of resources that you might normally only get if you're an undergraduate or graduate student in conflict resolution and peace building, have access to peace builder role models so they can have interactive Q&A with them, be mentored through a NewGen Peacebuilders peace education experience, and importantly, and this is a key determinant, have to imagine, design, craft, and implement actual peace projects. So, you know, imagine if this, these new Gen Peacebuilders and this new mental model had access to that. So what I've set up here is a short little video that shows you just how fresh this idea is in action. This weekend, we completed several cohorts with new Gen Peacebuilders in various cities. One of them was in Charlotte, North Carolina. And we put together a very tight little video that shows you, so what does this model look like in practice? And what does it look like in practice when COVID-19 has intervened and created new obstacles?
Many of the world's great peace leaders have pointed at the potential of young people. So, in February 2020, hopes ran high in greater Metro Charlotte, North Carolina, when 63 students from 20 high schools became the newest group to embark on the journey to become certified NewGen Peacebuilders. To be certified, participants complete intensive learning workshops to understand drivers of conflict and peace, and then design and complete team action peace projects in at least one of these areas: awareness, service, advocacy, or philanthropy. The Greater Metro Charlotte group had just finished peace project planning in 8 teams. All systems were go. And then COVID-19 spread on a global scale. They faced this question: how can we work on peace projects with closed schools and stay-at-home restrictions? Incredibly, all 8 teams adapted, persevered, and used new virtual skills to do so. Here are highlights from 4 of the 8 projects that share one thing in common: a belief in education as an essential pathway to peace. A growing number of teenagers are expressing their fears that climate change threatens their future, and their frustrations are not taken seriously. In 2015, the United States EPA and USDA announced a 2030 goal to reduce food waste, landfill waste, and carbon emissions by 50%. The Lighter Footprints team discovered that U.S. school cafeterias serve nearly 5 billion lunches every year in ways that add to the carbon footprint. So, the team partnered with Houston-based Footprint app and California-based Edible Schoolyards to develop an e-food feature that helps students advocate for sustainable food choices and lesson plans to make available to high schools in all 50 states. Data from the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics indicates that the majority of the 20 fastest growing occupations between 2018 and 2028 will require completion of challenging science, technology, engineering, and math classes, or STEM. The All-In for STEM team members realized that nearly all of them had a passion for STEM in common. They researched differences across race and ethnicity in terms of who chooses STEM classes and careers. They learned that the earlier children experience engaging activities, the better. And children in low-income minority schools often miss out on these experiences. The team partnered with Heal Charlotte, a nonprofit started after the 2017 protests in the city turned violent, with racial inequity at the core of the conflict. Team members designed and delivered STEM learning kits and delivered virtual lessons to young people in households served by Heal Charlotte. The No More Hotspots team focused on human trafficking of minors and learned that the state of North Carolina mandates schools to provide awareness instruction on human trafficking and sexual assault. But classroom content is not easily available or useful. Guided by an educator familiar with state education standards, the team developed an extensive human trafficking learning unit for high schools and a plan to present it to their local county board of education and the North Carolina Education Legislative Committee. Their bigger goal, a multidisciplinary unit available for use by high schools during Human Trafficking Awareness Month. It's been noted during the COVID-19 crisis that immigrants are at higher risk because many work in essential business service roles. Most official websites on COVID-19 protection measures are in English only, and protective face masks are not widely available to immigrant communities. The Helping Hands for Humanity team members from East Charlotte, the most diverse area of the city, were sensitive to the disparity. The team translated government COVID-19 postings into a multiple language website, recruited volunteers to sew protective masks and attach information about the website, collected donations to fund the effort, and partnered with local nonprofits serving refugees and immigrants to distribute the masks and information. These NewGen Peacebuilders focus on what they care about, test their concerns with data, listen to community members, and become equipped to build bridges for the rest of their lives.
Everybody to have as much time in the Q&A and the breakouts as possible, so I'll just make a couple of quick points as we're about to close here. One is that what we have learned in the 7+ years of doing this peace education program is that there are certain principles that actually spread across age groups. We've now used many of the fundamentals of NewGen Peacebuilders with adult groups, university programs, high school programs, and as I mentioned, most recently, the middle school program. That means we've also learned that while programs and needs vary by city, we have learned that there are certain universal fundamentals in peace education that apply wherever you are in the world. What changes is the issues you want to work on and the context you're sitting in. And so by training young people and their counterparts and supporters to actually take fundamentals into their local context and work on social issues, you can accomplish a lot. We've also learned that no one form works with everybody in every setting. So the format you just saw is a 12-week extracurricular program. We've also learned that certain cities really value an accelerator summit, a large gathering of 200 folks, for example, 200 young people. But most recently, and this occurred just before COVID-19, we realized that it's time for a sort of hybrid virtual model, where you can actually get a Peacebuilder certification in school clubs, for example, interact clubs, and you do a certain amount of the content digitally and virtually, and then you actually work live on your peace projects mentored at the local level. The other thing we've learned is there's certain constructs that translate wherever we go. One of them is the 8 Pillars of Peace from the Institute for Economics and Peace, and the other is the classic Galton's Triangle, which really asks young people or any participant to look at violence differently and realize that there are different kinds of violence that you can actually work on. So next, please. So the last thought I would like to leave you with is from the first speaker to me, and with the NewGen Peacebuilders reference in particular, there are 3 things I would recommend anybody think about in terms of peace education. Lots of things get labeled peace education. Good quality peace education focuses on impact and has a way of assessing it. The second is you have to learn to think of people as a multiplier effect. So the human trafficking team that you just saw in that video, between their work and the scholarships that supported them to be in the program, it's probably $5,000. They're introducing a whole new human trafficking learning unit that can be available to all schools in the state of North Carolina. People are a multiplier effect. And the last is collaboration is essential. The program that we're doing today actually started out with a recommendation from Jen Weidman, who used to run the Peace Center in Thailand, supplemented by Carla Leinbach, a Rotary Peace Fellow in Vermont, who was at the very founding of this initiative. Dr. Phil Gittens, who you heard Ximena introduce before or mentioned before, has been a director of global curriculum development for the program. And Rotary Peace Fellows have contributed in many different ways. It's the same as we go forward, especially in COVID-19. For Rotarians or anybody else who's with us today, the secret, especially in a pressured economic environment for forwarding peace education, will be focusing on collaboration if we're going to move peace education forward.
Wow, thank you, Patricia. I love this work, such important work. And thank you to all 4 speakers. I mean, so much has been shared. Fortunately, lots of questions have been generated. I asked Kathy Doherty to be our chat monitor and summarize questions and ask them. We'll have about 10 minutes for questions. So Kathy, please.
Great, well, thank you. We do have a lot of great questions, and I'm going to start out with one that is for all the speakers. It seems like peace efforts have taken a backseat with COVID. So how can we now leverage cooperation caused by the pandemic towards expanding peace? How can we bring it into the forefront?
I can give an example. 2 things. I happen to see that Debbie Rupchand is online, and she is with Rotarians down in the Caribbean. And they are currently constructing kind of a unified peace education effort that will go to Rotarians, Rotaractors, and Interactors and be available across their district, which includes 70 different country entities. I think forwarding big initiatives like that is one. Another example I would give quickly is California has more students than any other state in the country, and many countries in general. If you think about Rotarians and their partners thinking collectively about peace education across California, that's a huge footprint.
And I'll quickly jump in and note that, we're working with all of our members and members of our coalition as well to bring in these stories from around the world about peace efforts and bring them directly to Congress, bring them to the Hill, so they can see that this actually works and how necessary it is to keep these programs running, and also to really emphasize what the world would look like if we were to not keep these peace efforts going. And obviously, we all know here, preaching to the choir, it would not be a good thing. So we're taking all of these reports, we're sharing them with Congress, and we're synthesizing them and breaking them down into talking points as well.
For me, just dealing with our programming, we are an educational institution. So we just try and keep people educated about issues and things that are going on. And so to keep people educated about things that they can get involved in is what we'll continue to do to and then let them decide exactly what issues they want to tackle.
Mm-hmm.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Yeah, because my thing is not working. Well, I want to say that I think this crisis is teaching us to apply the do no harm approach that Peace Fellows often used a lot. And that is that whatever we do in terms of peace education and development, we have to remember that sometimes we have to continue with our programs, but it's not going to be the same. And sometimes we end up harming instead of trying to help. So that would be my position.
Welcome to the U.S. government.
Okay, so let me go on. Megan, there were a number of questions for you. I'm going to synthesize some of this. One of the questions was, how can civil society leaders on the call become more engaged with GFA and the ongoing dialogues? And some folks wanted to know a little bit more about the principles of GFA.
Sure. Absolutely. I should have mentioned earlier, both of our coalitions for GFA and YPS consist of organizations around the world. They're not just US based. That's how we get a lot of our stories and actual, like I mentioned before, the peace efforts that are actually ongoing. And that's how we bring them into the fold a lot. And a lot of times representatives from around the world join us on these calls with Congress as well, which is really, really, really powerful for our messaging. In terms of getting involved in the GFA, specifically on the coalition, I'm more than happy to share my email. We can definitely talk about getting involved. The coalition, I mean, like the act is technically passed, but we're still doing a lot of work, and the coalition still has a lot of updates and stuff that's going on. So we're more than happy to keep involving new members who are interested. And same with the YPS. I mean, this was just introduced. So if any organization's interested in being part of the YPS coalition, I'm more than happy to help get you involved. We have monthly coalition meetings with updates on what's going on in Congress, and as well as how people can be involved in the advocacy work. We share social media toolkits and stuff so people can have messages that are ready to go. And also just like how to get involved in other grassroots efforts as well. In terms of the dialogues, Those are happening the second week of June. The website actually just went up today to register, so I'm more than happy to share that with everybody in follow-up email. I think that's going out. And please share with your networks, with local, with civil society. We're looking for participation from a wide range of actors, but really also want to hear from those local civil society voices to keep them involved in like how the strategy is going to be developed. And in terms of the principles of the GFA, and I'm sorry, I'm trying to be quick. I know we're very limited on time. Similar with the other things, I'm more than happy to connect with anyone who's just interested in learning more in general. But very quickly, I mean, the GFA focuses on U.S. foreign assistance to prevent violence and conflict in fragile countries. We believe it saves taxpayers money by addressing the prevention and the causes of violent conflicts rather than the costlier approach of actually containing it. We believe it increases transparency and accountability by mandating biennial reports to Congress and the American people so they know where this money is going and how the programming is working out, and also so we can get learning from the programming to implement in future programming. I can't remember what I mentioned, but the GFA first starts with certain pilot countries, and then we hope to expand from there. It also strengthens research to identify the foreign assistance programming with the learning I just mentioned. And I'm happy, like I said, to share resources and connect with people further to learn more. So I won't get into too much more detail.
Right. I mean, the participants are going to get a recording of this particular presentation, as well as additional resources that we're talking about here today. Ximena, tell us more about the living well part of your Constitution. So what does that include, and how can other countries learn from it?
Ximena, you may be muted. Oh dear. Oh, you're muted.
Okay,
You'll need to, there you go.
I don't know, sorry about that. Well, what I was saying is that living well, I think that other countries can learn from it, is that this is a national pledge, general pledge of how to respect that harmony that indigenous, like our ancestors hundreds of years ago have been practicing. And that's that connection that we have with nature and with Mother Earth. In the way that this is embedded in the Constitution and in the society. So I think other countries can learn in terms of respecting indigenous populations and including them in the process of creating more peaceful and resilient societies.
Okay. Charles, for you, there are a couple of questions. Were the trainings, the history of the civil rights movement online, and then how do you choose students for the program?
So our application process, or applications go out every year on King Day, and it's an application process with local high school students starting in 9th grade. Now we have taken some exceptional 8th graders, but it's a thorough process that we go through, and then we select them based off of that. Just this year, this is the first year that we've actually rolled it out to our consortium sites as well. So sites in Montgomery, Selma, Greensboro, parts of Alabama as well now have small versions of this program. And what was the second question? I missed.
Whether the trainings, the history of the civil rights movements, were those trainings online?
So the trainings for the program particularly are not online, but part of the resources that make up the training, we some of them we do offer online. But the best resource that I could give people that is not just giving our program away would be to go online to www.bcri.org and go to our oral history project and hear these foot soldiers from their own words.
Okay, great. Do we have time for one more question?
Just one more quick question and quick answer.
Okay, well, let's see. For everybody, there is a participant on the call that works with nonviolent action and resistance, which is key to peace building. So how do you combine, protesting and resistance with positive peace, understanding they're part of a continuum and serve a role at different times of a conflict?
So let's have Patricia answer that.
Okay.
Well, two things. So the definition of positive peace is originally envisioned in Dr. Galtung's work was to create conditions of well-being for all. And I think Ximena's example of young Bolivians standing for gender equality and human rights and so on when they are doing it in a form of protest that is a resistance that is nonviolent is a magnificent example of that. Also, obviously, the work that Charles is emphasizing is an illustration of that. We do find that in teaching those concepts in NewGen Peacebuilders, people have forgotten or were not quite educated on all of the tools of civil resistance. And so we think it's a really important part of or element to bring into all peace education.
Great.
Great.
With
Thank
that,
you.
we'll-
Thank you, Kathy, and thank you all. Now is the time to break into our discussion groups where we can hear your thoughts and generate ideas that can be taken back to your clubs and communities. Each group will have a facilitator who will facilitate the discussion with the following questions. Do you think the world has become more peaceful or more violent? Do you think the advent of COVID-19 will have an effect for the future? And if so, what? Secondly, what inspired you or what did you learn from the speakers' perspectives and presentations today? How do we most effectively teach peace and what are some examples you have? And very importantly, what can Rotary clubs and you do to enhance peace education? So facilitators will ask for a note taker and a rapporteur in each group. Please post these questions in your room's chat box. The goal is for each group to develop some specific action steps to be shared when we return to the larger group. So I hope you all have a good discussion. And with that, Bill will break us into groups.
Okay, those groups will start now. It might take about 5 seconds to connect, but happy discussing.
How many groups? 9 groups?
10 groups.
10 groups. So it's going to have to be very quick. I'm going to ask the rapporteur to summarize in less than 1 minute 2 action steps that your group came up with. I'm going to ask the note taker to type those in from your group, put the group number into the chat box. The rapporteur, again, less than 1 minute, 2 action steps. So let's start with group number 1, facilitator, please, or a rapporteur.
And that was
Group
Jeff
number 1.
Diesel's group.
And unmute yourself, please. Jeff?
So Jeff,
Hi everyone.
Hi.
We really what the takeaway from our group is that the sooner we start this with kids, the better. Some in our group think that it's, once they become interactors, it's too late. But we also agreed that it should continue through high school, and that peace education should be strong at the high school age.
Great. So starting peace education young and through high school. Thank you, Jeff. Okay, group 2, who's the rapporteur?
and that was Martin's group.
Martin?
Okay, then it's me to report. Hello, everyone. So we discussed 2 main points. So the first one is that we are concerned that the global leaders are not seeking solutions for the benefit of all categories. But at the same time, we are very hopeful that on the local level, we are becoming closer as a result of the COVID-19. We are becoming closer as a community while supporting each other. And the second takeaway is that we think it's important for Peace Fellows to be brought in and involved in district activities. And we should advocate for that during the COVID, so it should be continued.
Thank you. And remember, note takers to type into the chat room your takeaways. Great. Group 3, who's the facilitator or rapporteur?
I'm the facilitator, but I was just wondering if Adam would like to present.
Adam?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. I don't remember basically the first question I believe was about leaders. And actually,
Adam, I'm sorry,
yeah.
We're looking at 2 takeaways. So what 2 takeaways did your group discuss?
Oh, okay.
Action steps.
No problem, Kim. So basically the action of the first question, basically we had talked about that, you know, of leader, basically it's more up to leaders to, you know, set forth, you know, different policies that would help Rotary in terms of, you know, peace building, and, you know, of that nature. So that's kind of where we headed towards in terms of, you know, how Rotary can move forward in terms of peace in other countries.
Okay.
We also kind of went over that it's not necessarily more or less violent in, you know, in those communities.
Adam, I'm sorry, it's Kim. Again, what what we're doing now is the question number 4 only. What are specific action steps that Rotary clubs and individuals can take? So if you have a real quick one, please share.
We didn't really. Yeah,
I can jump in. So we thought we had a discussion. I'm sorry, Adam, I put you on the spot.
That's right.
We're talking about that peace is actually not a choice. It's something that all Rotarians need to do, and it's inherent to what we as human beings. We also talked about co-creating programs that are focusing on young and youth education around the world globally. So very similar to what other people are saying. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Again, so we're looking at question 4 only. What 2 action steps did you come away with? So we'll go to group 4.
I'm talking for group 4. Our youth programs, we felt that the existing Rotary didn't need to invent new programs. Our Interact and RILA camps, that peace education should be a core of them, but they should take on a project, not just education. We encourage every Interact club to have a peace project such as anti-bullying, anti-racism, the same as RILA youth camps. And our second takeaway that we got to be bipartisan in any of these programs. They shouldn't reflect a particularly right or left view, but include everyone. That's it.
Great, thank you. Wonderful. Group 5, please. Group 5. Who is group 5, Bill?
I think we're 5. Are
okay.
We? Am I?
Go for it.
Okay, with my group. So basically, we had a lot of good ideas. We did get to the point to answering the number 4. One of the things was to have Rotary clubs form peace committees, and they could either form peace committees or become peace builder clubs, and involved Peace Fellows, the Association for Peace Fellows, much more kind of intricately, and specifically work on some special projects. We talked about practical projects that the club could be involved in to kind of get engaged with peace. And we also talked about them utilizing peace building skills, gaining kind of peace education for themselves to actually try to practice and utilize that internally within the club to deal with conflict in a positive way and for positive outcomes.
Great, thank you. Group 6, please. Who is group 6?
And Anna, that was your group.
Oh, sorry, I thought I was group 8. Okay, so I hope I get this right. We had some wonderful people in the group and great ideas, and I love the idea that peace is not a choice. Thank you, Stacy and her group. One of the actions is that Rotary should really be a driver of peace initiatives, should get itself into a position, educated and focused and prioritize being a driver of peace initiatives in their community. And 2, should actively and directly employ Rotary Peace Fellows in that work, in the planning and implementation of peace initiatives in their communities and districts. Thanks.
Fantastic. Remember to type these into the chat box because we're going to have
I just put the wrong group. And if anyone of my team wants to add, please add.
Yeah, please do. We're going to have a document. Thank you so much, Anna. Group 7. Who is group 7?
That's Helena's group.
Group 7.
Hi, this is Yelena. I would like to ask Rukmini to share some of our takeaways from the group.
Great. Remember to unmute.
Sorry, network issues. So yeah, 2 points from group 7 was, one is that there's clearly a possibility based on some of the peace education programs we've been running to use social media for peace education, even as it's being used for hate speech and for spreading fake news. There are youths that are using it very well for peace education as well. And the second point is around the need for Rotarians to start identifying with themselves as peace builders in their primary role in the world, so that we can use this platform to promulgate peace.
Excellent. These are great ideas. Thank you. So group 8 is my group, and we didn't have time to debrief. So Shannon, who was our note taker, would you mind, Shannon, sharing the takeaways?
Absolutely. So started off by just the emphasis on needing the need for peace education in all schools. And so talking about how that should be mandatory. And then from there, kind of Charles' point about how the Rotary could be involved by adopting school districts or possibly some type of like project involvement with the schools to be able to engage those students into that process and also build upon the education. John talked about living abroad for a year and how the Rotary Youth Exchange is really valuable in them gaining that perspective of kind of what's going on in other cultural contexts. And Perla talked about through her experience with the fellowship trainings and self-reflections and just having access to the large network of Rotarians and taking that back to Honduras, but adapting to that context.
Great, Shannon, thanks so much. So group 9.
Okay, the 3 takeaways that we left with is that I think in relationship to the definition of peace and how to measure it, a lot of folks still do not have a universal idea, right, of what the definition of peace is, and then, of course, how to measure it. So we did talk about the Global Peace Index, Positive Peace Index, and the work that IEP is doing. Also, talked about that peace literacy was key, and that assisting youth to recognize conflict and mitigate it is really important. And the question came up whether Patricia or how Patricia shares the curriculum that they're using, especially in middle schools. And I think lastly, real desire, wanting to work with and support Rotary Peace Fellows in the work that they're doing and wanting to really hone in more about how to do that effectively so that we all work together on this issue.
Thank you, Kathy. So last and not least is group 10. Who is group 10?
Hi, I was the scribe for group 10, and one of the things we talked about is normally, we're talking globally, but really to build peace, we got to think locally and figure out the local needs and what is causing things to not be peaceful in our local communities and districts. And so one of the first action steps from our group was to do an assessment of local needs to see where there is a breakdown and where there is not peace. And then in order to start addressing those needs, we also need to improve our clubs by increasing diversity and making sure that our clubs are reflecting our communities, because often they are not. And so we feel like those were just kind of the first 2 steps to really kind of build upon it. Of course, I think if we had more time, we would have come up with some additional steps, but those were some things that we wanted to share.
This is fantastic. Thank you all for these inspiring action steps. Yes, I'm sorry we had limited time, but we're now at the end of our time. I want to thank you all for your participation. Let you know that next Thursday, our webinar on May 28th is on dealing with xenophobia in times of COVID-19. And the following Thursday, June 4th, there'll be a webinar on refugees. So stay tuned. You're welcome to join. In closing, Rotarians and Peace Fellows see a world where people unite and take action to create lasting change. So we hope you will take action on the ideas you generated here today to expand peace education. So please look out for announcements about the upcoming Cyber Peace Conference on June 27th to 29th that will involve Peace Fellows and Rotarians from all the Peace Centers. Thank you for joining us today, and thank you for all the amazing work you're doing around the world. So I think with that, Bill, I appreciate your help and loved having you all on, and thank you again for your work.